in the state of Texas, not just in the United States, but in the world. My name is Dr. Deborah Murphy. I'm your moderator for today's session entitled Substance Use, a conversation around substance use, mental health, and the Black tax. I'd also like to welcome those of you who are checking in with us online, virtually. Your chat champion will make you feel right at home and provide the information you need throughout the session for those who are checking in virtually. Before we begin, I want to make it known that we are very thankful to the Wood Group who is making this conference possible. There are a few housekeeping issues before we get started. This is a safe, supportive space. So please help us to maintain a respectful and inclusive environment. If you're in this room in person, please do not join a Hoover session. If you're feeling overwhelmed during the session and feel like you need to step out and take a break, that's okay. Our conference suite is also available on floor 2 next to room 5. If you registered for CEUs, you must sign at the beginning of the session, and I think that was done, wasn't it already? Okay, they're doing it, okay. Sign into the session by scanning the QR code. Use the sign-in sheet. I think that's occurring right now. And also, we have really great conference merchandise for purchase. So go to our store at ctaafsc.com/shop. So right now, I'd like for you to join me in welcoming Miss Aisha Creary. Did I pronounce it correctly? I'm sorry. Aisha, I'm sorry. Okay, all right. Let me give you a little. I'd like to give you a little bit of background on Miss Aisha Creary. She is a licensed professional counselor who founded a private practice in the Austin, Texas area in 2019. She grew up in Dallas, Texas, and transitioned to Austin in 2017 to embark on a new journey as a school counselor. She spent nearly a decade in the education system, serving in the capacity of teacher, lead school counselor, and a district specialist. It's quite impressive. Ms. Creary, welcome. The floor is all yours.
Thank you guys for joining me today. So I'm going to stay right here in this little window. I'm usually a walker, so because we are live, I kind of have to be in one little spot. So I'll be right here in front of the table. But as she mentioned before, my name is Aisha Creary, and I am so excited to be having this conversation with you guys around substance use and how it impacts Black families. So we'll get started by going into talking about our learning objectives for today. So today we will get into talking a little bit about how to identify and understand the characteristics of those struggling with substance use, the impacts of trauma and how it leads to substance use, in addition to discussing the barriers, the Black tax, and mental health impacts on those struggling with substance use. So we are going to jump right into the next set of details. So what is it? So a lot of us are maybe peer support specialists, we are caseworkers, or we are clinicians, or we are family members of those struggling with substance use. So I'm going to do a quick little survey. So how many of you guys are service providers for those out into the community, whether it's substance use or just mental health in general? Okay, how about family members of those struggling with substance use? Okay, and then education system? Okay, cool. All righty, thank you. All right, so what is it? So it is the excessive use of illegal and legal substances, and those can include street drugs and prescription medication. Okay, so I recently had a conversation with someone who had asked me, do you think I have an alcohol problem? And so I asked them, what makes you think that you have an alcohol problem? And they mentioned that because they drink so heavily on the weekends, they weren't sure if they really know if it's if it could be classified as alcohol misuse, just because they only drink on the weekends, right? And so when you look at it, it is a mixture, right? If it impacts your ability to be social, if it impacts your financial, if it impacts your ability to make healthy choices, then it may be a possibility that you do have an issue, right? Now you can function and still have an issue. So keep in mind that that is a thing as well. So according to the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Manual for, y'all know the rest. um, it is listed to be as something where individuals who engage in the use of alcohol, substances, or different things like that, it impacts their ability, it leads to social, occupational, and other important, it impacts other areas of their functioning. So, sorry. All right, so then we'll get into some of the behaviors. So before we get into that, I'm kind of going to ask you guys to chime in this section. So when you say it, I'll repeat it just because there are people online. So how many of you guys have had interactions with people who struggle with substance use or alcohol use? Okay, so what are some typical behaviors you guys typically see? We like to call it crackhead behaviors in my neighborhood, but what are some behaviors you guys typically see in some of the neighborhoods or around the people that you guys have engaged with? Lethargic, okay. Sketchy behaviors. Say it one more time. Irritable, okay. Paranoia, okay. Concentration difficulties. All right, so according to the DSM and other research spaces, there are so many of the behaviors that you guys mentioned that come up for those who struggle with substance use, but then there is also individuals who engage in changes in moods. So some of these people become, as you guys mentioned, irritable. They start to become angry, they become aggressive. Some of them become excessive liars, or they give you a story as to why they need something. They become extremely private, where they kind of isolate or they go in different directions in their life than they said that they would. They finances, stealing, changes in their attendance. Maybe they start missing work, they start missing school a little bit more frequently. And sometimes they have somatic changes in their bodies. So these are people who may start showing up with pains and aches and like different issues within their body that was not there before. So there are several risks that impact those that lead to substance use. So most of you guys have heard of adverse childhood experiences. And so some of those things show up in risks leading up to substance use. And so some of those risks include abuse. So these are your individuals who not only have experienced physical, this includes emotional, mental neglect. It also includes sexual abuse as well. Community challenges. So these are people who may have more access to it in their communities than others. These are also those who just have challenges within their community that lead to the misuse of substances or alcohol use. Biological components. So as we all know, when you are expecting, everything that you experience, pretty much the baby experiences. And so sometimes we do have parents who do use substances throughout their pregnancy. And so those children are more susceptible to substance use or alcohol use. Cognitive impairments. So individuals who maybe struggle with setting boundaries, those who don't really understand what it is that they are engaging in, and even those that are just struggling in general. Peer pressure. So again, these are individuals who struggle with telling people no, or these are people who are people pleasers that are hoping to hopefully gain something out of doing the thing that they're asked to do. Mental illnesses. So of course, as mentioned in one of the previous presentations today, there are people who struggle with mental illnesses and then they have a co-occurring disorder, which probably would be something along the lines of, usually we see depression, a lot of times we see schizophrenia, and then in some instances we do see anxiety as being some of the 3 leading co-occurring disorders with substance use. And then other risks would include incarcerated family members. So this next slide, the sound is not working, so I'm going to skip that. There was a quick little poem that was from someone who struggled, who was a family member of someone who was struggling with substance use. All right, so trauma and substance use. So I like to say that trauma is subjective. In the DSM, it is not listed that trauma is subjective. It is listed that trauma is something that you witness or you experience directly yourself, and it's usually tied to like a natural disaster, combat, war, sexual trauma, different things like that, but it doesn't necessarily identify those that struggle with trauma from an outside lens. So substance use disorders is considered a diagnosable mental health disorder. Based on several research articles, trauma is associated with substance use. According to an article written in the National Institute on Alcohol, Abuse and Alcoholism, people are more likely to use alcohol to cope with their symptoms associated with their trauma. In interacting directly with clients and youth, majority use substances to cope with their traumas. So what this basically means is that when you have a traumatic experience, or those who usually experience traumatic experiences, they typically cope with it, or they exit, or they run away from their problems through the use of substances. All right, so let's kind of dig into the history of substance use and how it impacts Black families. So the marijuana era started in 1965 and ran through 1969. Of course, some would argue now is the marijuana era, but that is basically when it was introduced to Black communities more heavily, and it impacted the community more heavily. Psychedelics started in 1967 and ran its way through 1975. And that is when it started to impact the Black community. Heroin started in 1965 and ran through 1973. Now, of course, all of these substances and these classes are still heavily used now, but that is when it started to show up in the Black community. After that, underemployment, high school dropout rates, low employment rates, and housing started to impact the Black community, leading to more of those struggling with substance use, or it led to individuals who decided that, which makes sense, right? Selling illegal drugs was an easier way to make money when there were no jobs in the Black community. So not only was it introduced to communities in the 60s, it ran a wave after that because more people were more likely to sell it in Black neighborhoods. So in the 90s through the 2000s, there was an increase in arrests and the illegal selling of drugs. And of course, we all know in the 1980s, the crack cocaine epidemic hit the Black community the hardest, which we are still seeing the effects of that. A lot of us, our parents had us in the 80s, early 90s, and a lot of them were single family households as a result of substance use and how it impacted the men in the community, whether it was them going into jail or it was mom and or dad on crack cocaine, leaving sometimes the grandparents to raise the kids. So then from there, from about 1996 onward, California was the first state to legalize marijuana, but going forward, there have been other states that have legalized marijuana for recreational use and for use in healing, for healing reasons, in addition to it just being legal. A lot of people are now able to get medical marijuana cards in different states if it's not legal for recreational uses. So there has now been more research in the use of psychedelics in psychotherapy and psychiatry, in addition to the continued increase in legalizing marijuana. So that is how it has shown up, and that is how it is continuing to impact different areas of the community, right? So a lot of families do experience barriers in seeking services for their family members or just themselves as individuals if they are struggling with substance use disorders or alcohol misuse. So a lot of times it has a lot to do with being underinsured. So I know in my practice, I get a lot of clients that say, I want to use my insurance. I want to use my insurance. I'm like, okay, let's use your insurance. Do you know how it works? And they're like, nah, yeah, can you verify it for me? And a lot of them end up having high deductible plans. And so when we tell them what their copay is, they get to a place to where they can't afford it. And they're like, I can't afford $120 per session because they have high deductible plans. So they're underinsured. They have insurance, but they're technically underinsured because their plan doesn't cover anything. Of course, money, finances. If I have a substance use, I'm more likely to use it to continue to fund the substance use, and I will be less likely to use it for seeking care. The stigma. There is, of course, a continued stigma around substance use. And so a lot of times people just don't want to go and get the help because they don't want to be labeled as another individual that is struggling with substance use. And I mean, the community know, like we already know. So a lot of times people are like, well, you know, they've accepted me with this disorder or with this addiction. Therefore, do I necessarily need to go get help? Shortage of providers of color. That will continue to be an issue of concern just because there is a stigma around mental health. There is a stigma around seeking help. And then there is a stigma about going into mental health. I'm sure those of you who have gone through graduate programs and you're in your classes, they're like, yeah, you're not going to make money in this field, so don't go into it, right? And so that's what everybody believes. And so there's a lot of people that don't go into the helping field because the idea is that you won't make money, therefore leaving more and more individuals left without providers of color. The next one is not really knowing where to go. So there are a lot of places out here. There's a lot of retreats. There are a lot of centers that will support those struggling with substance use. And they have psychiatrists, they have therapists, they have other types of healing practitioners there, but people don't know how to access them. Or even if they did, again, it goes back to them being underinsured or not having the funding to be able to go. Fear around being committed. So I'll kind of share a personal story on this one. It's not necessarily my story to share, but it is my perspective from the experience because I was a part of it. So I have a family member who does struggle with substance use. And when we were kids, I probably was about 9. They were maybe about 15 or 16. And we tried to get them committed because they had a substance use issue at such a young age. Maybe they were 17 and I might have been like 10 or 11. But anywho, we go in, we talk to the people at the front desk, we bring the family member in. They didn't know what was going on because of course we were trying to do it behind their back to get them committed. And we go in, talking to the people, they call this person up. They're like, I'm not going back there. And so we got to a point to where we had to pin down this family member in order for them to be able to do what they needed to do to commit this family member. They eventually got out the very next day because of their age and they could make a choice. But they were at that delicate age where they could still make decisions about their health. So we could try to do what we wanted to do at the time. Of course, this was a while back. Wasn't the ethical thing to do, of course not. but it was a family trying their best to get this person help. So I understand the fear around being committed. Me watching it, it was traumatic, but I understand now that I'm adult what was happening. The next thing is believing that they can combat it on their own. So that's not necessarily not true, because there are people who just wake up one day and say, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I'm going to make this change and I'm going to do the things. Now, of course, sometimes they do end up seeking help, but a lot of times they were the ones that made the choice to change. So until that happens, there's really, that is the barrier. The person not being willing to actually change or not being ready to change. And the last one is people not believing that treatment will help. And I can understand that, because there's a lot of people who don't see people in the community going to get substance use help. So if they don't see other people around them healing through the services in the community, they don't believe it to be true for themselves. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of it all. So we've all again mentioned that we've seen people in the community, our own individual families, just people in general. So when we get into the financial stress on Black families, so if you have a family member that is struggling with substance use, or if you're a peer support specialist supporting someone within a family unit getting services, you understand the financial impacts that they have. That would be possibly, or could be, you buying them clothes. It could be you providing them with shelter, temporary housing, whether it's you're putting them in a hotel for a night so that they're not outside during the winter storms or during extreme heat. It could also be you funding them inadvertently. Some people know, some people don't know, because we don't know sometimes. It could also be you taking care of their children, which is big. It is a big financial commitment. This is you making sure they have health care, making sure they eat. If depending on their age, do you have to pay for daycare? Do you have to house these children? Are you feeding these children? Like, so many financial barriers, or so many financial impacts on that it has on the family. The next thing is stress. We all know how hard it is just dealing with people who don't have substance use issues. So when you are in a family, or when you are a peer support specialist, or you are a licensed mental health professional, and you are trying to help someone who is struggling with substance use, there's a huge barrier there through stress. Sometimes they come in and they're dysregulated, and it causes you to be dysregulated, which leads to you being stressed out, which leads to you being overwhelmed, which leads to the kids being overwhelmed, which leads them to being overwhelmed. And so everybody in the whole process of the dynamic, yes, they become stressed out. The next one is time. There's a lot of time that goes into trying to save, and I use that in air quotes, trying to save, support, and push through when you have a family member, or you have a client that you're working with, or however you are connected to substance use. There's a lot of time that goes into it. And so all of these things impact Black families specifically, because again, if you are taking in the children of a person in the family that's struggling with substance use, that takes time, that takes money, and it takes resources that you may not even have, which leads to stress. So these are all three things that impact the family unit. All right, so the Black tax is defined as the continued financial support of a person's family by a person who essentially made it out or created a space for financial freedom for themselves. What's typically missed in this definition is, or description, is stress it causes on the person, and sometimes the trauma associated with it. So of course, Black tax, again, as mentioned in the literal definition, is that you are the family member that made it out, or you are the family member that seem to have your stuff together. And so when you are the one who seem to have your stuff together, everybody comes to you. If something ever happens to me, my kids know to call you. If this happens, we know to call such and such. Or this person inadvertently already know that they cannot fail. So when it comes to substance use, the tax is doubled, tripled, and quadrupled. All right, so how is it connected to substance misuse? So as mentioned a second ago, it's doubled, tripled, quadrupled when you have someone that is struggling with substance use. So it can typically impact an entire family because it includes a financial tax, an emotional tax, a physical tax, and a mental tax. So what that means is, as mentioned in the previous slide, you financially are taking care of this person and possibly their offspring. You're also emotionally being taxed because not only does it hurt you to see this person struggling as a family member or as a peer support specialist or as someone who's working with this particular client, not only does it hurt you to see it, it ultimately impacts you because you have to have the mental and emotional capacity to deal with it. Because of course it's not your stuff, but you are forced to support and help in the midst of things that is not your stuff. And from here, let's talk about it. So in your family, how has some of the Black taxes shown up? So backstory, when I created the presentation, I was under the impression that there will be families here, more families than healthcare workers. So my questions are tailored to that. So as we talked before, even if you work directly with clients in the field, how has that shown up for some of your clients? If you have stories or anything that you can share out to the people in the room or the people online. You can come up and talk up here on the microphone for me. I think because the people online won't be able to hear you. Mhm. Okay, now we can. Okay. 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 Mhm. Right. Okay. So it sounds like you got the emotional tax coming along with. Absolutely. All right, you can come share. Thank you. Mhm. Absolutely. Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely.
if individuals, if their body metabolizes, everybody's body metabolizes drugs in a different way. So in different amounts. So what I'm trying to say by that is, if in fact I take a drug and my body metabolizes extremely well, the likelihood of me using that in succession is a lot higher. So if we're in a room, for slave service or understand, and then use that in the basic practices or whatever the case is, or look this stuff up. Because this is a balance. It's not exactly what we believe it to be anymore. It was an idea back in the day, especially with around AA. You were saying if somebody in your family used alcohol, the likelihood of you being alcoholic is now gone up. But that's not necessarily the case because we can't create a gene in yourself. Their idea was you have a addictive gene now, or predetermination of a gene for alcohol. It's like you can't create that because you started drinking. Nothing can create a gene except an alcohol. So we know that to be fact amongst the living creatures. That's how that state is. So this specific piece of this genealogical makeup is important to understand. If we're at a party and we're all drinking, we have myself, I would say, well, I'm not going to drink for a month. This is too much. I'm never going to do it again. Yourself, for example, well, maybe 2 weeks, maybe not until the weekend. And somebody else would say, man, why aren't we drinking today? Why are we drinking right now? Like, let's drink right now. It's because their body was able to metabolize that alcohol extremely well, which would mean that they use in succession, which means the closer that they use is the likelihood to lead to an addiction. It's not necessarily because somebody uses a drug once and they're addicted. Just want to go ahead and just put that out there first and foremost. With the black tax piece or the taxing piece, I mean, it makes extreme sense.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So as he mentioned before, a lot of what leads to substance use is behaviors, right? Like, yeah, you can be predisposed to certain things, whether it's genetically or whether it's not. You still are learning the behavior somewhere, right? You know how they say, oh, you came from a line of alcoholics. Yeah. Yeah. But I made a choice that that's not a behavior that was conducive to where I want to be in my life or where I see myself as an individual, right? Okay. So how many of you have experienced it firsthand and grew resentment because of the tax placed on you, the black tax being placed on you? Can you come share if you don't mind? Okay, thank you for sharing that. Anybody else want to share out their experiences with resentment and substance use? Okay. And then how many of you can just raise your hands, are the ones being taxed right now by family members struggling with substance use? Yeah, me too. Me too. And it is a struggle. It can be a huge struggle for those who are struggling with it, because as she mentioned before, sometimes you just want people to take care of you. And sometimes the stigma that you can do it or you'll figure it out will always be placed on you. You'll always be the strong one. You'll always be the one who can just do it all. And you'll always be taxed, not only from family, but from friends, from your colleagues, from your employers, because they see that strength in you because you've always had to do it, not realizing that having to do it was survival. You had no choice. So you were operating in the capacity in which you were surviving. All right, so story time. So you guys heard me mention it earlier, my original story. So substance use has always been a part of my life from childhood on up, whether it was direct siblings or whether it was the older generation within our family, just because, as mentioned before, the crack cocaine epidemic hit the Black community the hardest. And so raising additional kids usually come from that, because you do have family members that have kids out of the behaviors that they exhibit because of their addiction, such as prostitution, such as any other type of sexual labor, right? Where they are engaging in sexual activities, whether protected, unprotected, or whether it's through abusive relationships where their addiction is being funded by these sources. So it leads to people having children. And if you have a substance use disorder, you're not going to have your children a lot of times. Sometimes people slide through the cracks, but a lot of times you're not going to have your kids. Your family will, whether it's biological family or whether it's the cousins that's not really your cousins that decided to take in your kids. Providing housing for these family members. Again, even if they don't have kids, you may be in a position where you are bringing these family members into your home and say, you can come in and take a shower, stay for the weekend, but you got to leave on Monday. That's still expensive. Those things add up. You're feeding them, you're clothing them, you're making sure that their well-being is good. Increased poverty. So when it comes to those who are struggling with substance use, you're more likely to experience poverty because the resources and the funding of your addiction is going towards that. Not only is it going towards that, with the actual family itself, you are now being forced into poverty. As mentioned before, if you're taking on those kids, you're forced to get Section 8. Even if you, before those kids, could afford to live on your own, you've now taken on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 kids that you didn't plan for. And so now you're forced into government assistance. Now you're forced into subsidized housing. Now you're forced into two to 3 jobs. Now you're forced into quitting your career because you have to. You have to, because their experience with their parent experiencing substance use leads to trauma, right? So these kids don't have their parents. That's the first line of trauma. Then they are struggling with the concept of, my parent chose this drug over me. Then they're dealing with you because you already mad. You already have resentment because now you got to take in these kids. And then on top of that, they start acting out. They have undiagnosed disabilities sometimes, whether it's emotional disturbance or other non-invisible disabilities, right? That now you have to come into the school. And I don't know, is it picking up online? I know it's next door, but I can't tell if the online people can hear it. Sorry, it was distracting me. No, okay. All right, so again, now you have to take off your career every single day. The school calling you, the daycare center calling you, somebody calling you about these kids. And so now your career is impacted. So whereas maybe you were making 6 figures, but now because you have these added responsibilities, your job doesn't care. So now you got to go. Or you have to flip your schedule where you're at home with the kids in the afternoon or in the morning, depending on, how the schedule works for the kids. Trauma. It is traumatic to take on kids or to witness a family member on substance use because, again, as mentioned before, some of the behaviors show up as paranoia, shows up as irritability and anger. And so if someone is coming to you asking you to support them, or if you just pull up on them on the street, right, and you see them engaging in aggressive behaviors and you didn't grow up in that environment, but yet you have to engage with it now it's traumatic. Now you're experiencing a trauma that was never there. Although you don't use drugs, it's traumatic for you to be around it. And then, of course, increased onset of mental illnesses within families. So if I decide that I am going to be the designated person over, let's say, Social Security for someone who has a substance use disorder in addition to a co-occurring disorder, right? Because some people who have substance uses will still get SSI or some other type of government assistance. And so they have to have somebody over those funds. And so if that becomes a thing, now you're stressed out because they need their money. And now they calling you. Now they're gonna come to your job. Now they gonna harass you about their money. Not only that, stress is listed in the DSM. So even if it's just as, I hate to use the word small or simple, even if it's just as simple as stress, that can be considered a mental health disorder, but it can lead to depression. I feel hopeless. I feel like this person is not going to get any better. So what am I supposed to do with this thing and or with these kids? What am I supposed to do? Or I become so anxious because it has been placed on me to take care of everything, not only the person themselves, but I have to take care of myself. I have to take care of the kids. I have to make sure that they're not sleeping on the street. I have to make sure I got to do it all. I basically adopted more kids that wasn't my kids because they have a substance use issue, whether it's the person themselves, because now they're functioning at the capacity of a child. And so you're basically raising another child, whether they have kids or not. All right, so those were some impacts, or the previous were some ways in which Black families get hit the most. But it also continues, right? If you see someone struggling with substance use, and of course, let's say they have kids or they don't have kids, but you're the person supporting and making sure they're good, you're more likely, or people are more likely to not engage in home ownership because all of their money is being funded into taking care of them. We've seen so many people send their kids to substance use retreats. We're going to get you some help. And they clear their 401k, they clear their savings, or they even sell their homes to make sure that they get help. Now, as mentioned before, they have to want the help. So I've seen families and people do this 10 times. 10 times, and those retreats are not cheap. And so although you may have had a house, you pledged $20,000 in 2015, you pledged another $20,000 in 2022, and then you continue to pull out of your savings and out of the equity of your home to make sure that this person gets the help that they need. So you're less likely to own homes if you continue to be the person supporting. And aside from that, if you've taken on additional kids, kids are expensive. Whether you got assistance or not, they're expensive. And so if you have to save $10,000 or $15,000 to buy a home, but yet you've taken on 4 or 5 kids, they always need something. So it's kind of hard to own a home when you're dealing with that many obstacles. The next thing is increased crime rates. So within these communities, when there's data around communities having higher crime rates when there is higher substance use. Typically, neighborhoods that have harder drugs like heroin, like methamphetamines, and sometimes psychedelics. I think psychedelics was like one of the third listed ones for communities that have have higher crime rates when those substances are within those communities. Of course, as mentioned before, increased poverty. There's the trickle effect, right? If you're spending money on all these things, you're more likely to experience poverty. And if you're not in poverty, when this thing is introduced to your family, poverty comes because you're spending money on things that you never anticipated on spending on. Increase in single family households. Well, if you're in your 30s, you're dating, and now you done took on a family member's kids, don't nobody want to deal with them kids? They don't. I know I wouldn't. These ain't my kids, and I can't say nothing to them. We know CPS gonna be at the door if you take these kids. I'm not dealing with that. I gotta support you with these traumatized kids. I'm not doing that. And so a lot of times you have people who just remain single because they're sacrificing everything that they have to do or they want to do or that they feel like they should be doing at whatever age group that they're in to take care of the kids or to take care of the person, right? Because if you have someone who's on substances, it could lead to them experiencing depression. And we all know people who struggle with depression, depending on how it shows up, right? They can't get out of bed. They can't brush their teeth. They can't form healthy relationships. All of the things you need to maintain employment. So therefore, you are still taking care of these people. And if you have a spouse or if you have a partner, they gotta go. But if you love them just as much as they are struggling with their addiction, you ultimately have to sacrifice everything. And people are less likely to stay because they don't have to deal with it. All right, so that is pretty much everything for today's presentation. Sorry, that was a dramatic end. My bad, y'all. I thought I had one more. I did. I had a video. So any questions? If you have questions, please feel free to come up to the mic. I think we might have some online questions.
It's written here that I have a Zoom tech present. Do I? Oh, we don't have that?
No, we don't have any questions yet.
Okay, all right. So if you have a question from the audience, please come up to the mic. And also we will repeat your question so those online.
They'll hear it.
Oh, they will.
This microphone, they'll hear it.
Okay. Okay, so we're opening it up for questions and answers.
Yeah. Come up to the mics because they're not gonna hear you online. Hi. Thank you. Absolutely. Mhm. Yeah. So I think first you have to be okay with the word no. They always tell you you have to help yourself before you can help anybody else. And so if you are constantly helping everyone else and you haven't really wrapped your head around your anger or your resentment towards the behavior, it's going to be really, really hard for you to really help them the way you need to do it with the word no, right? Let go of that guilt. Say no. No, I'm not going to be able to support you. Also, if you want to continue to love them, listening. I don't have the capacity to give, but I have the capacity to give you resources. I can give you a number for this place that will give you housing. I can give you this community support care worker who can get you some gas cards so that you can get to work. I can give you some resources, but I can't pull it out of my own pocket. If it's an emotional tax, I don't have the capacities to support you, nor am I a professional who really can do it because I'm biased in this. I'm pissed too. I'm mad too. I'm resentful too. So because of all of those emotions that's wrapped up in there, I gotta hand you over to somebody else. So I can sign you up for some therapy vouchers so that you can get some help that you need, get the help that you need. I can do everything except do it myself and be okay with it. It's hard because the sympathy gonna come in, but at the end of the day, this is gonna sound kind of sexist, right? But the system is set up for women. So if she does need resources, there is no reason why she can't have them because she is a woman and the system is set up for women. So get her connected to a caseworker at one of the local agencies and say, hey, they can get you all the resources you need. And even if it's like a housing situation, I can't help you, but let's get you in this shelter. They're gonna get you a place to stay. They will always get you a place to stay. So just be okay with saying, I can help you in this way, but I don't have the capacity to help you in this way. What are your thoughts on use of marijuana for the treatment of mental health? Okay, that is a very hard question for me because we all know people that smoke that use marijuana that is functional. We also know individuals that use marijuana that is not functional. And so there's more and more research being done on the use of marijuana with our military population, in addition to psychedelics. So when you ask about marijuana use and treatment, ethically, it's a no, right? It's a no. Like, please don't roll up in my sessions. Please don't vape in my sessions. Please don't do it. It's a no. But when it comes to the medical use of marijuana, it depends, right? I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a nurse practitioner, so I don't do medication management. So if you were to ask a professional or a provider underneath that designated healing profession, right? They may say it's okay. We can use it. We can microdose with our clients because we do get clients that are under the care of physicians in other states where marijuana is legal for medical purposes, and they're using it in a way to support the clients, whether it's for ADHD, whether it's for depression, whether it's for whatever. But if it was up to me, I don't know how I feel about it on a personal level. I don't know, because then you have to redefine the entire DSM, because according to the DSM or research, marijuana use, one, is illegal, and two, it's not technically used for mental health related issues. So any more questions? Okay.
I just want to say to the young lady who had mentioned about, being taxed. I've been taxed by a family member for probably over 40 years. And I will say to you what I have learned through that experience is if you can't afford to give the money, don't do it. In some instances, I've given the person half of what they asked me for. There have been times when I've really felt bad because they've had to live out of their car, and they've come to my house before and stole from me. So I said, no, you can't come to my house anymore. So you just have to learn how to gradually draw those lines to what you're going to take and what you're not going to take, what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And when you know you have helped, like I know I have helped for decades, so I have no guilt feelings anymore about saying no. and I have learned to say no, and I'm still learning to say no.
Yes, no is always hard. I always tell people like no comes in 4 phases, right? It's the I don't know what the word no mean, like I don't know how to say it. Then it's no, but then you feel guilty and you also feel like you have to give an excuse. Like, no, I gotta pay rent, or no, because I gotta do X, Y, and Z, but you still feel guilty because it's you really can say no, but you really don't want to say yes. Then it's the next layer, which is no, you don't feel guilty, but you may give excuses, or vice versa, where you say no and you give an excuse, but you don't feel guilty, right? And then the last no is just like, it's a no. Like, I ain't doing it. No excuse. Feel how you want to feel. You're in control of your emotions. You got to learn how to manage it yourself. And so when you are getting into a place to where you're really okay with the word no, it's going to be a lot more easier for sure. Yes.
Say too, early on with the taxing, the family member had a lot of children. And so I was really helping the children. I didn't look at it as helping my family member. I looked at it as helping the children because they didn't ask to be here and they were in situations that they should not have been in. And so I kind of stepped up to the plate really to help them out, with food, clothing, just all of that. And so now the children are grown. And so feeling better about saying no, because there's nothing physically wrong with my relative uh, able to work and everything. So I can easily say no now.
Absolutely, because the tax don't end when they turn 18, though. Sometimes. Sometimes the text continues because they start families and they're like, well, I need advice, I need this, I need support with this. And so you're still feeling that text even when they become adults, even if you've already given them all the tools, but sometimes they just don't have the capacity to take the tools and actually use them until it's too late. And now you're digging people out of a hole. So yeah, you can cut the kids off too. They're adults now. Now, of course, you don't have to leave them out to drown, but setting aside time. This is what you want to do. This is how you can do it. This is the capacity that I have to support you. And then doing the check-ins and saying, have you done X, Y, and Z? Cool. How bad do you want it? You don't want it bad enough? All right, that's it. So no more online questions, right? Nope. Okay, no more in-persons. Cool. All righty. I think you said you did. Okay, that's fine.
Hi, everybody doing? My question is, I'm in recovery. I have lived experience, and the trauma part and the glasses on here and the substance use. Okay, I'm a peer support. I work with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and where I'm getting a lot of trauma at is having a internal battle with what they call harm reduction. So harm reduction. So what I'm saying by that is I'm being asked by some of my clients to help them get what's this thing? In fact, I picked up Narcan, supply clean needles. I work in housing, so I go there, do home visits. Sometimes the doors open and then I'm hit with a blast of cocaine, and so I'm getting a lot of triggers and stuff, but to try to do my job effectively, so I'm walking in situations where there's active drug use. So looking at my own self-care, I'm about really, I'm faced at a point to where I feel like I'm doing more harm to myself than I'm doing help to my peers, And I was just wanted to know what type of insight I could get from you.
That's heavy, right? Like, I don't know that I could be okay walking into a home where someone was heavily using meth or heroin or whatever the situation is. And so to help yourself in situations to prevent like secondary trauma or to prevent harm from yourself is take a break, right? Like, I know we all have to work. We all got to do the things, right? But the systems are set up for you to be able to take care of yourself, right? So if you work for a company that has leave, I'm not saying use your leave. That's not where I'm going with that, but I'm kind of going there, right? Um, use it, right? Take a leave. Talk to somebody. Go to therapy and say, look, I'm so stressed out. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm hurting. I need to take about 4 weeks off so that I can process this work that I'm doing because it's impacting me. And so, because you are seeking help for yourself, they will honor it. Again, I can't tell you nothing in between that, but taking time for yourself to take care of yourself to where one, your job is secure because you love the thing that you do, but you also take a break. You take a break, is separate yourself from it. And then if that is not something you feel most comfortable with doing, switch positions, right? You might be a peer support specialist in the field, maybe seeing if you can go into a training role where you train other peer support specialists, or even just a situation where you go into case management where they have to come into the office and get services. So just trying to pivot out of that environment so that you don't find yourself in an early grave because it is heavy and stress impacts the body. And the same that goes into, the black tax, whether you're working directly or whether you're a family member, it impacts you physically if you are taking on all of these taxing situations out in the field. So, all righty. Well, thank y'all.
I'd like to thank Ms. Aisha Creary for that fantastic and outstanding presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Creary. And so please take a few moments to complete the survey, the workshop survey, for a chance to win a whopping $25 gift card. It helps us to know how we should improve, whether we're doing okay. And if you're seeking CEUs, the forms will be in the survey, and the links are in the chat. So thanks again. Be safe, and you're attending